What's up guys and welcome back to the channel. So in a recent video we took a look at the parts that we're going to use for a new studio PC build. Now that build is going to be used for demoing things, benchmarking graphics cards, and it gives us something a little bit more stable going forward. But if you haven't checked that video out, make sure you do. We'll pop a link to the top. In that video we'll explain why we chose the parts we did. But in today's video we're going to have a look at putting it together and seeing how far we get with it. So for this system we've decided to go with Intel. Now most of our systems in the studio are actually made by AMD, and it's been a long time since we built an Intel system, probably from around 2002, so it's actually going to be a bit exciting for us. But first up we've got the motherboard. Now the motherboard that we chose was the MSI MPG Z490 Gaming Plus, and we did that purely because MSI are a good brand, we've never had any problems with them, and we wanted something a little bit high-end so that it would last. As motherboards go, it's actually a pretty basic model. We managed to pick it up for about £100, although these generally retail for about £170, so we got actually a pretty good deal. But being an actual Z board, you do get a lot of features that you wouldn't get on many of the others. Now, that's one of the reasons why we specifically chose this, because it comes with extra headers, it comes with lots of different things that you would need for demoing extra things going forward, including extra M.2 slots and just things like that. So as the board goes, generally, we've got a built-in I/O shield that's going to make things way easier for when we start doing builds with it. We've got the 4 DIMM slots and it takes DDR4. We've got the PCIe slots for obviously graphics cards and that, although I think we're probably going to be running some form of riser and vertically mounted so you can see graphics cards going forward. The top M.2 slot has a cooler actually installed on it, which is pretty cool. And then we've got more headers for things like fans than we can actually count. On this board particularly, if we just quickly run round, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's 7 fan headers, and one of them, 8 as well, because we've got the CPU one there. So that's 8 fan headers altogether. We've got USB-C, and we've also got things like dual USB 3 slots here and here, so you can have a sideways one or one out the top. Now that's going to be perfect for us because the case we're fitting it into is an NZXT case, and it has that great big bar down the side to hide everything, so we'll be able to hide those cables really well. Along with those headers, we've also got other headers for things like RGB, which is actually a really good thing. We've got some 3-pin here, we have a 4-pin down here, and we also have another 3-pin there. So we've got the choice of ARGB or RGB. Now I'm not sure what actual lighting we're going to be using in this system, if anything at all. I know the case does come with something built in, and it uses its own controller system, so we may not have to actually use anything from this board. But again, it starts to future-proof things as we go. For the CPU, obviously we're going to be using the i5-10400F, and we chose this one because it's a great 6-core 12-thread processor that came at a really good price of around £128. That means altogether for £228 we've got a board and a processor that is more than enough for gaming and more than enough for the benchmarking we will do with this system. But obviously with the board we can always have a bit of an upgrade path, because this will support 10th and 11th gen processors all the way up to i9 and all the way down to i3s, and I'm sure at some point we'll get those benchmarked too. Now, with like most lower end CPUs, this one obviously comes with the CPU itself and then a stock cooler with some thermal paste on it that looks just like that. Now we're not going to be using this cooler at all, we'll put it back in the box, we'll use it on another thing later on if we actually ever get round to it. But for now we're going to put that to the side, we'll put it away, and the thing that we're interested in is the CPU itself. Now, as most of us know, Intel CPUs don't actually come with any pins on the back. They use a different type of socket to AMD, and they're pretty easy to install all round. If we just take our motherboard just like this, and we lift that arm, leaving the actual cap on the top, we simply just drop the CPU in like that. We don't want to do it too hard, and we don't accidentally want to drop the CPU on this and bend any pins, because the pins are actually in the board themselves. We want to flip that down, and then as we actually push that arm, the little cap will come off, and now our CPU is super secure in the socket, and there's no way that we can damage the pins any further. It's always best to keep this little bit of plastic, because if you ever want to remove this CPU and store the board or sell the board, it's great to actually put these back on, because it'll protect it for the next buyer and protect it for yourself if you're ever going to reuse it again. So we'll make sure that we put that in the motherboard box when we store it, and that will be all fine. The next thing that we're going to install is a M.2 hard drive. Now we decided to go with Crucial because they're pretty cool guys, and this one's going to be more than enough for the system. It's a 500 gig NVMe. It's not the fastest in the world, but they're pretty stable, pretty well priced, and you can't really go wrong with a bit of Crucial. In general, this is what an M.2 drive looks like. They're not very big at all compared to the old big 3.5-inch drives that we used to have, and they're really super fast compared, and they simply go into a slot on the board. Now we're going to be installing it in this top one here, which has the cooler. So we first need to remove that cooler using the 2 screws there and there. And then what you'll find is there's a little piece here to slot it into, and then it will sit on one of these mounts, and you can usually move these mounts if you've got a shorter drive, because they do them in different sizes. This is the standard size. Which means we'll actually have to remove the little screw on this one, which we actually pre-installed on this motherboard. We have had this motherboard out and we did that. What you'll find is you'll get a bag of about 3 of these. Don't lose them, because if you do, it's really difficult to keep your drive down if you don't have, in particularly, one of these actual cooler bars, because these can actually stick the drive down itself. There is a pad on the back, and we'll show you that in a minute. But if you don't have one of them, like this bottom slot here, obviously it won't stick down if you lose your screw, which we have done before here. If we just slot that into there, you'll see that it actually spring loaded, and if you don't have a screw, it won't actually stay down. So we don't want to do that. What we want to do is we want to install this drive into the top there, and then simply pop the screw down just like that. And there we go. Now some people do remove these little film labels off them to try and get a better heat dissipation to the coolers. I don't think you generally need to, because I do believe they're actually made out of metal, but it's completely up to you if you want to choose to do that. Now for the cooler, we'll just knock the screw, well, the screws don't come out the one side, but we'll just knock that one screw out. What we want to do is we want to remove this piece of plastic, and it will actually show us the thermal pad underneath. Now these are a little bit sticky, so be careful when you stick it down, because you want it in the right place, and it will actually screw to that pad itself plus the end block there. So if we line up the one on that end, line up the one on that end, now it should be sticking to the drive itself, and it's not usually a problem to be able to take these off. What I have found is if you buy those extra bays that you can put the M.2 drives in, sometimes the sticky pads on them are so stuck that you can't get the drive back out again, but I've never actually had an issue with anything like this where it's from the motherboard, because it will actually lift off, it doesn't really squeeze it. So that's the drive installed. Next up, we'll have a look at the memory. Now for the memory, we chose the Trident Z RGB purely because it's actually super good stuff, and it will look really awesome when it's on film, particularly in this system. You probably shouldn't buy memory just because of the looks of it, but why not if you can. This stuff is generally quite expensive, but we managed to pick up this kit of 2 8GB, so there's going to be 16 gig in total of DDR4 3200, and we picked it up off eBay for around £60, so that's an absolute bargain for the memory, and particularly how stable this kind of stuff is. It's really generally quite high-end stuff. Now to install the memory, you obviously need to slot it into the slots, but there is a specific order that you need to go for. We will want these 2 slots here, and what you need to do is read your motherboard manual, because sometimes they are a little bit different, but this is going to be DIMM slot A2 and B2, which I have looked up the motherboard on this and it's pretty much correct. It's got to be those 2 slots to run in dual channel, and it also specifically says you should use them first. I tend to find it's generally the same on most of the motherboards that I get, but some are slightly different, so again, make sure you check that manual. But to install it, we simply have to line up the little notch in the middle and slot the memory down. As we click it down, the 2 little clamps that we opened will actually close onto the memory and hold it in, and that's pretty much good to go. Now you will need to know that if you ever need to reseat memory, which generally seems to be a big problem now and again, where you won't get a video picture or something will go wrong with the system, and a lot of people will recommend that you remove the memory and reseat it again, and obviously you just need to pull the clips, slot the memory out, slot it back in again, clip it back down. But that's the memory installed, we've got the processor installed, and we've got the hard drive installed, and it's all looking pretty good. The next job is actually one of the most difficult ones that we're going to be doing, because we've never actually installed a cooler. such as the one we're going to be installing now. And for the cooler, we're going to be installing this from NZXT. It's a Kraken X53. It's a 240mm radiator with 220mm fans and a pump that will actually go straight onto the CPU there. Now we have to be careful as we fit this because we want to make sure we've got the pipes where we want them, and we're going to have to line that up beforehand. I've fit many coolers in the past, usually from people like Cooler Master, and sometimes the brands do have actual different types of fittings. So we'll open this one up and we'll have a look at what you actually get. And if we end up doing a bit of a cut here, it's probably because we've had to get the manual out and do a bit of reading before we did. So let's pull it out and see what we've got. So we've actually got the cooler now all out of the box, and as you can see, it's pretty standard layout. We have a 240mm radiator with a pump. Now I really like the NZXT pumps because of the size of them. I think they really do give you quite a big pump head there, which I'm not sure how it's going to fit yet, but we'll figure that bit out. And it's also come pre-installed with the Intel bracket on it. If you can look at all the other pieces that we've got here, you can see that this one with the shape of it is obviously the AM4 bracket, and they do have a little bag here with AM4 written on it, so we're going to assume that's for the AMD socket. This one we're going to assume is for the Intel socket, and we'll figure out how we install that in a minute. And then all of these really long screws are going to be to fit the fans to the radiator themselves. Now, we do need to come up with a way that we're actually going to install this in the system. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to have that in the front being this side. The pipes will go over and somehow we will get it probably like that. So it goes around the memory and up the side. And then we'll have the top cables, because you use extra cables on this for USB and power to be able to power the pump and also do the RGB. Will probably come out the top and hide through the system. So what we'll do first is we'll install the fans onto the radiator, which should be a simple case of lining up the fan, and we want it to blow through the radiator. So lining up the fan something like this and installing all the screws, and we'll do that. And then we'll see how we're going to actually fit and mount the cooler, which has already got thermal paste on it as well, so we don't need to worry about that. It's got it quite protected there, so we don't need any extra. We'll figure out how to get it on the motherboard, and then we'll go through that process. Okay, so after a bit of tinkering, what we realised was that to install the fans in the NZXT H500i case, we needed to remove the mounting bracket from the front of the case and install the fans through that mounting bracket into the radiator. So that's done now. Confused us a little bit, but it's actually done. We also managed to take a quick look at the instructions just to make sure that we were fitting the back plate properly. Now this is the back plate that you'll need for the Intel boards, and for this socket in particular we'll just need to move, because these little things actually do move, to adjust them all to the center and simply pop it through the back so that we can see the little pegs come forward through the holes, just like that. And then we can just drop the board down and it should push them all through, just like that. Then what we need to do is take these little screws that have got a thread either side and just simply thread them down into each corner. Now, I'm not going to use any kind of tools to tighten these up because I don't want anything to be damaged. I'm just literally going to do it finger tight all the way around. And once we actually come to do the screws in the top, which are these ones, and these will simply go through once we've installed the actual cooler, I'll just tweak them a little bit with a screwdriver, and that way it can stop them from any kind of vibration from causing them to come loose. So now that we've got each corner pulled up, what we'll need to do is remove this protective casing from the actual cooler itself. And if you actually look at the brackets on these, they do use a system that is a twist off kind of thing. So if you're going to fit the AMD one, you simply want to pop it on and twist on like that. Now we will want this one to face down as it's in the case. We will want it to go, it's going to be awkward now, that way round. So we'll simply just drop it down, lining up the holes. And that should cause it to mount down on top of the CPU. I can feel it rocking on the CPU, and then we just simply put these screws into the corners, one in each corner. I just want it to actually pull down for now, and then we'll add the pressure in a minute. Pop this one on this side, just tweak these pipes out of the way. Just like that. And then we simply toe it down in each corner. It's best to go corner to corner, opposites each side, because then you get a more even distribution of weight down. That's pretty much the general rule for anything that you're doing out there like this. We don't want them too tight, just enough. And it kind of appears that these do bottom out quite low, so it shouldn't be too much pressure on this CPU. It should just be just enough, and we don't want to take it any further than that. And that is the cooler installed. Now obviously we've got a little bit of a clear tape thing here that we can take off, and you can also rotate this all the way around so that the NZXT label logo, once it actually shines through with the RGB, will the right way around. We'll assume that the label is the right way around for now, but we can easily change it. And that is where we're going to leave it today. So we've got the motherboard installed with the hard drive, the memory, the CPU, the cooler. Obviously we'll give this cooler a bit of a test, make sure it's all running properly and that it's mounted properly, but it doesn't actually seem that bad now. I actually like this kit, it's looking really cool. The pipes, hopefully, once they go into the case, will go just around the memory, just like that, so that we can still see the memory, because obviously we bought memory that looks good. With the pipes where they are at the moment, I have noticed that we can't actually use memory slot 1. We need to do the pipes a different way, and when we come to do that, maybe in future, we'll swap the cooler around and have the pipes on the other side, or maybe on the bottom, because I think this one you can actually rotate in any order. It doesn't have to go side to side. You can also have it at the top or bottom. But for now, that's where we're going to leave it. If you have any recommendations for us, make sure you drop them in the comments below. We're going to install this in the case next. We probably won't do it on video, so the next time you see this system, it should be up and running and benchmarking something. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.